A single promise, spoken to a crowd, can strip men of their homes, push them into winter marches, and end with a city's streets running silent. But we don't actually have the exact words that lit the fuse, only competing versions written later, each with a different meaning. So what was really unleashed that day? And why did it keep coming back for 200 years? Before armies moved, before ships were hired, the first weapon was a sentence, spoken from a raised platform to people packed shoulder to shoulder. In that crush of breath and wool and candle smoke, the idea of armed pilgrimage took shape, violence framed as penance, distance turned into devotion. And once that idea exists, it doesn't stay small. Watch what happens next. The world that hears the call is fractured, lords feuding, knights hungry for status, monasteries reforming, and a papacy trying to turn moral authority into command. The pitch is an adventure. It's a bargain: take a vow, accept hardship, and receive spiritual privilege, legal protection, remission, a sense that God has signed your orders. But who gets to define the vow, and who gets to cash it in? Far to the east, another ruler is making his own calculation. Emperor Alexios watches Anatolia slip away after decades of crisis, and he needs soldiers, disciplined ones, paid ones, controllable ones. So sealed messages go out, requests for help, framed as diplomacy, not apocalypse. He's not inviting a tidal wave, he thinks he's ordering a detachment. And that misunderstanding will cost him. Now we reach the moment that becomes legend. Clermont, 1095. Pope Urban raises a hand, and chroniclers later swear they remember every beat, yet none of them agree. In one version it's about helping Eastern Christians, in another it's about Jerusalem, in another it's about purifying violence at home by exporting it outward. If the speech changes in retelling, then the Crusades' meaning changes too, so which version wins? Whatever the exact phrasing, the response is unmistakable. People surge forward to take the cross. Not metaphorically, literally. Cloth is cut, stitched, pinned to shoulders and chests, and a vow is spoken that binds a life to a route not yet walked. The vow isn't just emotion, it becomes a legal condition. And once a vow becomes law, someone has to enforce it. That enforcement is where the machine begins. Property is mortgaged, debts renegotiated, guardians appointed to protect farms while the owner is gone. Wax seals press into warm red puddles, turning faith into paperwork you can present in a court. A crusader can't just walk away, not without consequences in this world and the next. And the first people to feel the weight of it are their families. The crusade doesn't depart as one clean army. It breaks into waves, early bands with more hunger than planning, then princely contingents with banners, retinues, and rivalries. The road itself becomes a filter: winter, disease, famine, and the simple math of food. Every mile asks the same question: is this still devotion, or is it just survival wearing a cross? When the Crusaders reach Byzantine lands, the alliance turns brittle. Alexios' once recovered cities return to imperial control. Western leaders want leverage, titles, and security for what they're risking. Oaths are sworn, solemn, public, and deeply ambiguous. Each side hears a different promise in the same words. And when you build a campaign on a misunderstanding, the cracks don't show at first. They show at the first siege. Siege warfare is slow violence, timber cut, ropes twisted, engines assembled like grim carpentry. The Crusaders learn quickly that vows don't feed horses. They need ports, markets, bargaining power, things you don't get by praying harder. So leaders negotiate, threaten, and promise, all while the rank and file wait outside walls that don't care about their intentions. And the farther they go, the more they start acting like rulers. In the Islamic Near East, the first response is not a single united front. Power is divided: Seljuk successor states, local dynasties, rival courts, and Egypt's Fatimid Caliphate with its own priorities. A Muslim chronicler sits with ink and reports, trying to make sense of newcomers whose motives look both religious and territorial. Fragmentation buys the invaders time. But it also plants the seed of a counterstory, one that will harden into purpose. The Crusaders finally reach the prize that chroniclers keep naming: Jerusalem. Accounts, Latin and later Muslim, describe the aftermath in language that is both triumphant and appalled, as if words themselves are trying to look away. We don't linger on the killing, we linger on what follows: emptied houses, soot on stone, prayers interrupted. Because the capture isn't the end of the story, it's the beginning of a new problem. How do you hold it? Holding it means building states, thin, defensive, and hungry for reinforcements. Edessa, Antioch, Jerusalem, Tripoli, names that sound solid, but behave like brittle fortresses connected by risky roads. They're outnumbered, far from their recruiting grounds, and surrounded by shifting alliances. A kingdom on paper still needs grain, garrisons, and gates that don't fail at midnight. And that's where the sea becomes a lifeline. Enter the merchant contractor, not a knight, not a priest, but a man with ships and contracts. Italian ports can move barrels, horses, and men faster than any road, if the price is right. Coin is counted, cargo space is negotiated, wax seals make promises enforceable across water. The Crusader states don't just depend on faith, they depend on invoices. And once war has invoices, it can be repeated. Back in Europe, the papacy learns a lesson that will echo for generations. Preaching can mobilize bodies at distance. Not by direct command like an emperor, by binding consciences. Sermons spread like sparks, carried by clerics and rumor, and the cross becomes a social signal: who is committed, who is suspect, who is protected by law. The first expedition succeeded enough to make the model believable. And belief is the most renewable fuel there is. But the model has a hidden cost: it creates expectations. If a vow promises spiritual reward, then failure becomes spiritual crisis. If Jerusalem can be taken once, why not again, why not always? Each new threat to the fragile states triggers panic, letters, councils, and fundraising. The crusade stops being a once-in-a-century shock. It becomes an option on the table. And the next time the table is flipped, the response will be automatic. On the ground in the Levant, Crusader rule is less occupation than constant negotiation. Local truces, tribute, prisoner exchanges, and uneasy markets keep the walls standing. The Frankish knight who imagined a clear holy mission now learns a different skill: bargaining in the shadow of battlements. The line between pilgrim and prince blurs. And every compromise, every deal, creates enemies on both sides who call it betrayal. In Muslim cities, news arrives like a wound reopened, a port lost, a caravan raided, a shrine threatened. The chronicler writes names, dates, and grievances, but also something else: an emerging language of response that ties defense to legitimacy. Leaders begin to understand that unity is power, and power can be clothed in religious duty. The invaders didn't just bring armies, they brought a reason for rivals to cooperate. And that cooperation will eventually find a face. Decades pass, and the Crusader states age into a strange shape: coastal corridors, castles on ridges, and a kingdom that survives by sea. Their strength is stone and shipping, not population. When reinforcement falters, everything trembles, because there's no deep reserve to fall back on. The sea lanes become arteries. Cut them, and the heart stops. And that's exactly what their opponents start planning. Then a city falls that sends shockwaves through every pulpit in Europe: Edessa, 1144. It's not just a loss, it's proof that the miracle can be reversed. Letters fly, bells ring, and preachers step into squares with the same basic formula: vow, privilege, departure. The Second Crusade is born not from novelty, but from repetition. And that's the hinge. Crusading becomes a system that activates on schedule. Watch the system at work: cross-taking ceremonies, public pledges, and a flood of small transactions: land pawned, jewelry donated, debts forgiven or called in. The crusade is preached like a moral emergency, but it runs like administration. It needs record keeping, enforcement, and deadlines. And the more it's used, the more it expands, because now the papacy has a tool that reaches beyond the Levant. The question is, who else will be labeled a crusade target? Meanwhile, in the Islamic world, consolidation begins to outcompete fragmentation. Leaders like Zangi and then Nuh al-Din build power through administration, fortresses, taxes, disciplined armies, and through rhetoric that frames resistance as duty. This isn't a sudden awakening, it's statecraft under pressure. The chronicler's pages fill with a new pattern: fewer rivalries, more coordination, and a growing confidence that the invaders can be pushed back. But the decisive test still waits. For crusaders on the ground, the war becomes generational. Sons inherit castles their fathers took, and with them inherit enemies, truces, and grudges. A Frankish knight stands on a battlement and realizes something chilling: he is no longer passing through. He is embedded. The vow that once meant go now means stay, because leaving can feel like abandoning a sacred trust. And that sense of permanence will make the next loss unbearable. Then comes the figure who can turn consolidation into a storm: Saladin. Not as a mythic hero, but as a political operator, Egypt and Syria brought under one strategic direction, resources pooled, rivals managed. The Crusader states face something they rarely faced in the early years: sustained pressure from a coordinated power. The coastal lifeline still matters, the castles still loom, but coordination changes the math. And the math is about to be tested at a single battlefield. When the Crusader army marches into heat and scarcity, logistics becomes fate. Water sources, scouting, discipline, these are the quiet forces behind holy war. The battle that follows, Hattin, breaks Crusader field power and opens the road to Jerusalem. Chroniclers on all sides describe the shock: a world rearranged in days. But the real twist is what happens next in Europe. because loss doesn't end the machine. It feeds it. News of Jerusalem's loss hits like a bell struck too hard. The papal apparatus responds with what it now knows how to do: preach, tax, recruit, and sanctify departure. Kings take the cross, fleets are assembled, contracts multiply. The Third Crusade becomes proof that crusading is no longer improvisation, it's infrastructure. But infrastructure has its own logic, it demands results. And when results don't come, pressure finds new directions. Even when crusaders achieve partial victories, the strategic reality stays grim. The crusader states are thin, their enemies adaptive, and their own leaders divided. Coastal cities become everything, ports as fortresses, fortresses as warehouses. The Italian merchant contractor thrives in this world, because war at distance is a shipping problem as much as a sword problem. And that's the uncomfortable truth: the crusade survives because it can be supplied. So what happens when supply becomes leverage? By the early 1200s, leverage turns into a trap. Crusaders take vows, but they also take loans. Ships are promised, payments delayed, and contracts written with clauses that don't care about sacred intention. When the expedition can't meet its financial obligations, the route itself becomes negotiable. This is how a crusade can drift, step by step, toward targets it wasn't meant to touch. And the next target will shatter Christian unity in a way no Muslim army could. Constantinople appears on the horizon like a mistake you can't undo. The greatest Christian city of the East, walls like cliffs, domes catching pale light, was supposed to be an ally's capital, not a prize. But factional politics, promises, and debt pull the crusade into Byzantine affairs. Alexios' old gamble returns as a nightmare his successors can't contain. And when the city is breached in 1204, the damage is more than stone, it's trust. Western accounts like Villard try to explain the diversion. Greek memory brands it as betrayal. Either way, the result is a deep rupture. Latin and Byzantine Christians, now divided by blood and plunder, less able to coordinate against rising powers. The Crusade ideal was supposed to unite Christendom under a sacred cause. Instead, it proves it can be turned inward. And once that precedent exists, no border, political or moral, feels entirely safe. Yet the crusading system doesn't collapse from shame. It adapts. The papacy continues to issue privileges, authorize preaching, and extend crusade mechanisms to other theaters and enemies. The tool is too useful to discard. It raises money, channels violence, and asserts authority. But every time it's used outside its original purpose, it stretches the definition of holy war. And the more elastic the definition becomes, the more contested it gets. In the Levant, what remains are hard points on the coast, cities that function like locked doors facing inland. Acre becomes a hub, commerce, pilgrims, soldiers, and rumor packed into narrow streets. It's a place where faith meets calculation daily: who can be trusted, who can pay, who will arrive in time. For defenders, the sea is hope. For attackers, the sea is the problem to solve. And the attackers are learning fast. On the Muslim side, the counter-mobilization matures into routine. Administrators count resources, commanders coordinate campaigns, preachers frame defense as a shared obligation. The chronicler scholar, older now, writes with less surprise and more structure, because the war has become a known category of life. It's no longer who are these strangers? It's how do we outlast them? And outlasting is not a battle, it's a timetable. Outlasting means targeting the Crusader state's weak points, isolated castles, inland routes, and the political fractures between Latin lords. A fortress can be starved as effectively as it can be stormed. And every siege forces a choice: relieve it and risk an army, or abandon it and lose legitimacy. The Frankish knight watches allies argue while the enemy builds earthworks. The walls are stone, but the coalition is not. And still, Europe keeps sending waves, smaller, later, sometimes too late. Because by now crusading is woven into institutions, preaching circuits, taxes, legal protections, and the assumption that distant war can be morally financed. A young man takes the cross because his father did, because his village expects it, because the sermon made it feel like the only clean choice. But there's a darker question under the ritual: who benefits when the vow becomes tradition? The Mediterranean becomes a chessboard of ports and contracts. Genoa, Venice, Pisa, names that sound like distant cities, but function like arteries for crusader survival. The Italian merchant contractor doesn't care which lord rules which castle, he cares whether a harbor is safe, whether payment arrives, whether a rival fleet gets the better deal. In this world, piety and profit travel on the same ship. And when storms come, both drown the same. By the late 1200s, a new power tightens its grip in Egypt and Syria: the Mamluks, disciplined, administrative, relentless in siegecraft. They don't need to win one glorious battle, they can simply keep coming, methodically reducing coastal strongholds. Each captured city is not just territory, it's a severed supply node. Acre watches the inland horizon darken with smoke from places that used to answer its calls. And the defenders start to feel the end approaching without knowing the date. Inside the Crusader enclaves, daily life becomes a balancing act between normalcy and alarm. Markets open under the shadow of towers, priests hold services while scouts ride out, ships arrive with grain and rumors in equal measure. The Frankish knight, now more garrison than pilgrim, counts arrows instead of indulgences. And that's the quiet tragedy of the system. It promised salvation through departure, but it ends in endless waiting behind walls. The chronicler scholar records the war's rhythm with a different kind of fatigue. Early pages described chaos and disbelief, later pages describe strategy and inevitability. He notes truces, betrayals, alliances, proof that no side is a single mind. But he also notes something else: memory hardening. Stories of desecrated spaces and broken oaths become part of identity, passed forward as warning and justification. And once memory becomes policy, peace becomes harder than war. Back in Rome and across Europe, the papacy's reach has expanded through crusading. It can summon, tax, protect property, and threaten spiritual penalties, tools that function like governance. But that reach is always contested by kings and nobles who want the same authority. Crusading becomes a bargaining chip in politics: who leads, who pays, who gets credit, who gets blamed. And the more political it becomes, the more the original vow is tested by compromise. This is the episode's central irony. The crusade begins as an armed pilgrimage, an act meant to be personal, penitential, bounded by vows. But it evolves into something impersonal: repeatable mobilization, a machine that can be pointed. And machines don't ask whether the operator is wise, they only ask whether the mechanism still works. In the 13th century, it still works, barely. And the place where it will be tested to breaking is Acre. Acre is crowded with contradictions: merchants who need peace to profit, knights who need war to justify their presence, pilgrims who arrive expecting miracles and find ration lines. The sea brings reinforcements, but it also brings delay, because help has to choose to come. Mamluk forces assemble with siege engines and patience. Inside the city, leaders argue over strategy while civilians listen for the first impact. And then the bombardment begins. Siege is a war of time. Defenders patch breaches by night, hauling stones with blistered hands. Attackers widen trenches, inching closer with shields and earthworks. The Frankish knight stands in dust so thick it tastes like chalk, realizing that courage doesn't rebuild a wall fast enough. The merchant contractor watches ships in the harbor and calculates how many can leave, how many should stay. And everyone wonders the same thing: will Europe answer in time? When the walls finally fail, chronicles describe panic, smoke, and the collapse of order, an ending that feels both sudden and long prepared. We stay with aftermath: abandoned helmets, broken timbers, a chapel door hanging crooked, the sound of waves continuing as if nothing happened. Acre's fall in 1291 marks the end of the major mainland Crusader presence in the Levant. But the Crusade idea doesn't die on that shoreline. It travels back with the survivors. Because what was built over 2 centuries wasn't only castles, it was procedure. Preaching campaigns that could be restarted. Taxes that could be levied. Legal categories that could be invoked. A vocabulary of enemies and sacred objectives that could be repurposed. The papacy had discovered a way to mobilize mass violence at distance without being on the battlefield. And once that discovery exists, it can reappear in new forms, in new places, under new justifications. In Byzantium's memory, the Crusades become a cautionary tale, an appeal for help that invited a force too large to steer, ending in the trauma of 1204. In the Islamic world, the wars become a long narrative of invasion met by consolidation, fragmentation turned into unity through pressure. In Latin Christendom, crusading becomes part of identity and politics, not only devotion. 3 worlds remember the same centuries differently. And those memories will outlast the ruins themselves. Return, finally, to the mystery, the sermon that started it all. We don't have a transcript, only reconstructions by Fulcher of Chartres, Robert the Monk, Baldric of Dol, Guibert of Nogent, each shaping the message for a different audience. That means the crusade was partly invented in the retelling, its meaning edited as it spread. The war wasn't launched only by what was said, but by what people believed they heard. And belief is uncontrollable once released. So when we say the Pope launched a war, we're really describing something stranger, a technology of mobilization. Vow-taking turns private faith into public obligation. Indulgences and protections turn that obligation into legal reality. Merchants and ports turn it into logistics. And rival rulers, Latin, Byzantine, Muslim, turn it into strategy. No single person controls the full machine once it's built. And that's why it runs for 200 years, because it can run without anyone's permission. If you're enjoying this kind of grounded, source-aware storytelling, where we follow the documents, the logistics, and the human cost, subscribe for more episodes like this. And tell me in the comments, do you think the Crusades were driven more by belief, or by the systems that grew around belief? Because the next detail makes that question painfully real. Consider the ordinary Crusader's problem. You've taken a vow, but vows don't buy food. So you borrow. You mortgage land. You promise repayment with interest, or with favors. Suddenly your salvation is attached to a contract, and someone else has a claim on your future. This is how a spiritual act becomes a financial web that reaches across villages and ports. And when that web tightens, it can pull an army off course. Or consider the prince's problem. You're leading men who expect victory because the vow promised meaning. If you retreat, you risk morale and legitimacy. If you press forward, you risk starvation and ambush. Every decision is framed as sacred, but every consequence is painfully material. That tension, between the heavenly promise and the earthly bill, drives the Crusade story again and again. And it's why the wars don't end cleanly, they just reset. The same tension appears in Muslim politics too. Fragmented rulers can't coordinate, but coordination demands concessions, shared command, shared resources, shared legitimacy. When leaders like Zangi and Nuwa al-Din build unity, they do it with administration as much as preaching. The chronicler notes not just battles, but appointments, taxes, and fortress repairs, the quiet scaffolding of resistance. Jihad rhetoric matters, but it's carried by institutions. And institutions can endure setbacks without collapsing. By the time Saladin consolidates power, the conflict is no longer a surprise invasion. It's a known strategic environment. He can plan campaigns across seasons, coordinate multiple fronts, and negotiate from strength. For Crusader states, that changes everything. Raids become sieges, sieges become losses, and losses become sermons in Europe. The Crusade machine needs crisis to justify itself. Saladin's victories provide crisis in abundance. And Europe responds, again, because it almost has to. This is where we have to be careful with the word holy war. Officially, crusading is framed as penitential, an act tied to confession, hardship, and spiritual privilege. That matters, because it explains why people accept suffering that looks irrational from the outside. But the same framework also makes violence portable. It can be authorized far away, against people the Crusader has never met. And once violence is portable, it becomes temptingly usable. The mechanism invites expansion. Expansion doesn't always look like conquest. Sometimes it looks like paperwork, a new indulgence formula, a new tax, a new category of protected Crusader property. Sometimes it looks like rhetoric, a preacher describing opponents in a way that makes negotiation feel sinful. And sometimes it looks like a simple shift in habit. When crisis hits, everyone already knows the ritual response. Crusading becomes a reflex. And reflexes don't ask whether the last time worked. On the coast, that reflex is measured in ships. The merchant contractor watches political winds like weather, which lord controls which harbor, which alliance holds, which fleet can arrive before a siege tightens. He negotiates because he has to, because without him, the Crusader states choke. But his existence also reveals something unsettling. The distance between Europe and the Levant can be bridged routinely. Once distance is bridged routinely, future leaders can imagine future wars. And imagination is the first mobilization. By the late 13th century, imagination meets exhaustion. The Crusader enclaves are no longer expanding, they're clinging. Reinforcements arrive in drips, local politics fray, fortresses become islands. The Mamluks don't need to be dazzled by the Crusade's spiritual claim, they only need to break its infrastructure. One port at a time. One wall at a time. And when the last wall falls, the machine doesn't vanish, it simply loses its stage. That's the enduring consequence. The Crusader states can disappear, yet the Crusade apparatus remains available, stored in law, memory, and habit. The papacy has learned it can summon resources through spiritual language. Rulers have learned they can borrow that language for legitimacy. Communities have learned to measure honor by whether you answered the call. And across the Islamic world, the memory of invasion becomes part of how unity is argued for in moments of threat. The past becomes a toolkit, and if you want the most sobering detail, it's this: the Crusades were never one story. They were many overlapping stories, pilgrims seeking salvation, princes seeking security, merchants seeking routes, emperors seeking survival, rulers seeking unity. That's why they lasted. Not because everyone agreed, but because the system could absorb disagreement and keep moving. The sermon at Clermont didn't just start a march. It invented a pattern, one that history kept repeating. The hardest part of this story isn't choosing heroes or villains, it's watching how easily a vow becomes a mechanism, and how long mechanisms outlive the people who built them. If this episode gave you a clearer, colder picture of how that crusade machine was invented, comment "I took the vow" below. I read every single comment. And if you want the next chapter on how medieval institutions turned belief into power, subscribe, because the pattern doesn't end here.